In the quiet hills of Southeastern Nigeria, there are two kinds of power that people fear and respect in equal measure. The first is the power of the pulpit, where pastors call down fire from heaven, where prayers are believed to move mountains, where miracles happen under bright lights and camera flashes. The second is older, darker, hidden in forest shrines where blood is spilled at midnight, where ancestors answer when called, where debts are collected across generations. Most people choose one word or the other. But what happens when these two powers collide? When a man of God makes a mistake so grave that it awakens forces he doesn't believe in. When a pastor, celebrated and trusted by thousands, impregnates the daughter of a native doctor, a man whose power doesn't come from scripture, but from bloodlines older than any church. This is not a story about good versus evil. It's about consequences. About secrets that refuse to stay buried. About a pregnancy that would become a spiritual battleground, and about 3 lives caught between the altar and the shrine. What you're about to hear is a testimony to the fact that some mistakes don't just cost your reputation, they cost you everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Pastor Solomon Eze was a name spoken with reverence across 3 states. For 17 years, he'd built his ministry from nothing, starting with street evangelism, graduating to rented halls, and finally establishing one of the largest churches in the region. His Sunday services drew over 2,000 worshippers. His healing crusades were legendary. Politicians, businessmen, and common people alike sought his prayers, convinced that God spoke directly through him. His wife, Grace, had been with him since the beginning, back when they had nothing but faith and determination. She'd sold her jewelry to pay for their first church rent. She'd fasted and prayed when offerings barely covered their meals. She was the silent strength behind every sermon, every breakthrough, every testimony that made his ministry famous. But success has a way of creating distance in even the strongest marriages. The busier Pastor Solomon became, the less time they spent together. Counseling sessions, conferences, late-night prayer meetings, the work of ministry consumed him entirely. Grace understood, she'd signed up for this calling. But understanding doesn't fill the emptiness that accumulates in separate bedrooms and conversations reduced to church logistics. Then, 9 months ago, a young woman named Amara joined the church choir. She was 23, beautiful, with a voice so pure that members whispered she must have been sent by God himself. What they didn't know, what she never told anyone, was where she came from, and who her father was. Amara was born in a small village in Kogi State, the only daughter of Motsi Okonkwo, a native doctor whose reputation spread fear and respect across the region. People traveled from distant places to consult him, bringing offerings of goats, cloth, and money, seeking solutions to problems that hospitals and courts couldn't solve. Childless women came to him and left pregnant. Business rivals consulted him before important meetings. Politicians sought his blessings before elections. Growing up in that compound meant Amora saw things most children never witness. Midnight rituals under ancient trees. Animal sacrifices that stained the earth red. Her father speaking languages that seemed to summon presence into empty rooms. She watched, learned, and quietly hated every moment of it. When her mother's sister invited her to relocate to the city and start fresh, Amora saw it as her escape. She wanted normalcy, to attend church without carrying the weight of her lineage, to sing without wondering if her voice carried more than music, to sleep without dreams that felt like warnings. At Victoria's Faith Ministry, she found what she'd been searching for. The pastor was kind, encouraging, treating her talent as a gift from God. His wife welcomed her warmly, inviting her for meals, giving her motherly advice. For the first time in years, Amora felt like she could breathe. But Pastor Solomon noticed more than just her voice. He noticed the way she moved, the brightness in her eyes, the gentle way she spoke. At first, it was innocent admiration. Then it became lingering glances during rehearsals. Then conversations that lasted longer than they should. Then late-night calls under the pretense of discussing church programs. If you're still watching, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you powerful stories every week. Grace sensed the shift before anyone else. The way her husband's attention drifted during dinner. The phone calls he took in other rooms. The cologne that smelled different. She didn't confront him immediately, she prayed instead, building walls of intercession around their home, believing that whatever darkness approached would recognize her prayers and retreat. But some battles aren't won with prayer alone. 5 months after Amara joined the church, Pastor Solomon made a choice that would destroy everything he'd built. It started with one moment of weakness, a late-night counseling session that crossed boundaries no pastor should cross. Then it happened again. And again. Each time, he promised himself it would be the last. Each time, he convinced himself he could control it, manage it, end it before anyone found out. Then Amora missed her period. When she took the test and saw the 2 lines, her world collapsed. She sat on the bathroom floor of her small apartment, holding the test strip, feeling her chest tighten with panic. She hadn't planned this. Neither had he. But now a life was forming inside her, and the consequences would be far greater than either of them could imagine. When Amara told Pastor Solomon she was pregnant, his reaction revealed everything she'd been too hopeful to see. There was no tenderness, no reassurance, only panic. His first words weren't, "Are you okay?" but "Are you sure?" His second question wasn't about the child, but about who else knew. He offered her money. He suggested clinics where these things could be handled quietly. He spoke in the cold, calculated language of someone managing a crisis, not caring for a woman carrying his child. That moment changed Amara. The girl who'd come to the city hoping to escape her father's world suddenly understood why people sought his power. The church promised grace but delivered judgment. Her father's world, at least, didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. For 3 weeks, she carried the secret alone, watching Pastor Solomon preach about holiness while avoiding her eyes. She sat in services where grace led worship about God's faithfulness while guilt pressed down on her chest like concrete. The congregation praised their pastor, unaware that the man they trusted had become someone else entirely when the cameras turned off. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. During offering time, Amara stood up and walked slowly toward the front of the sanctuary. The congregation assumed she had a testimony. Instead, she stopped at the microphone and spoke words that would shatter the church. "Pastor Solomon," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "why are you pretending you don't know me? Why are you preaching about truth when you've been lying to everyone in this room? I'm carrying your child, and you know it." The sanctuary exploded. Gasps. Screams. Phones immediately started recording. Members rushed toward her. Grace sat frozen in the front row, her entire world crumbling in real time before 2,000 witnesses. Pastor Solomon stood on the platform, gripping the pulpit, his face drained of all color. And then, with a firmness that surprised even himself, he denied everything. "She's lying," he declared into the microphone. "This is a spiritual attack. I have never touched this woman. She's being used by the enemy to destroy this ministry." Amora stared at him, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment she saw him clearly, not as a man of God, but as a coward willing to sacrifice her to save himself. "You don't know what you've just done," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the chaos. "You don't know who my father is. You don't know what runs in my blood. The God you preach about can't save you from what's coming." She walked out of the sanctuary then, leaving behind shock, confusion, and fear. That same night, 500 kilometers away in Kogi State, Amora's father received a phone call. His daughter was crying so hard she could barely speak. When she finally told him what happened, how the pastor had used her, impregnated her, then denied her publicly before thousands, Motsi Okonkwo didn't raise his voice. He simply listened. And when she finished, he said 5 words that chilled her to the bone. "Come home. I'll handle it." 3 days later, Pastor Solomon collapsed during a board meeting. One moment he was speaking, the next he was on the floor, gasping for breath. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but every test came back normal. Doctors found nothing wrong, no heart issues, no neurological problems, nothing that explained why a healthy 42-year-old man suddenly couldn't stand without feeling like invisible hands were pressing down on him. But Pastor Solomon knew. Deep in his spirit, beneath all his theology and doctrines, he knew. He'd heard stories growing up, stories about native doctors whose power didn't depend on whether you believed in it or not. Stories about bloodlines that carried authority older than churches. Stories about debts that demanded payment. That night, alone in his hospital room, he finally broke down and confessed everything to Grace. Not because he'd found moral courage, but because fear had stripped away every defense he'd built. Grace sat beside his bed, tears streaming down her face, listening to her husband admit that their entire ministry had been built on a foundation that was now cracking. The church board held emergency meetings. Some members demanded Pastor Solomon's immediate removal. Others argued for grace and restoration. The debate raged for weeks while the pastor's condition worsened. He lost weight rapidly, couldn't sleep without nightmares, and developed a tremor in his hands that no medication could control. Meanwhile, back in Kogi, Amara gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Her father performed traditional rites, declaring that the child belonged to their lineage, not to a man who denied her existence. Whether through spiritual power or simple biological consequence, the timing was undeniable. The moment Amora's baby took her first breath, Pastor Solomon suffered a stroke that left half his face paralyzed. Today, Pastor Solomon lives in a small compound, far from the megachurch he once led. He can speak, but with difficulty. He can walk, but with a cane. He still believes in God, but he's learned something that theology school never taught him, that faith doesn't exempt you from consequences, and that power exists in forms you can't control just because you don't acknowledge them. Grace eventually divorced him, not out of hatred, but out of survival. She now leads a women's ministry focused on helping wives navigate betrayal. Her testimony is powerful because she doesn't sugarcoat the pain or pretend forgiveness came easily. Amara raises her daughter in her father's compound, teaching her about both worlds, the church and the shrine, so she'll understand that power without character destroys, regardless of where it comes from. And somewhere in the space between their stories lies a truth we all need to hear, that the positions we hold don't protect us from the choices we make. That secrets always demand to be told. That you can't dishonor someone's daughter and expect her father, whether he prays in a church or a shrine, to simply accept it. This wasn't a battle between Christianity and traditional religion. It was about a man who thought his title made him untouchable, who discovered too late that some mistakes awaken forces that don't care about your theology. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments what part spoke to you the most. And if you thought this one was powerful, wait till you hear the next story we are working on.